Joining me today from Washington, Mr. Ali Alfoneh. He's a senior fellow at the Arab Gulf States Institute in Washington. How are you, Mr. Ali?
Thank you very much, and thank you for the kind invitation.
We are glad that you are in our show, and I will start asking about your book. You advance the theory in a series of essays published by the American Enterprise Institute, culminating in Iran Unveiled, how the Revolutionary Guards are transforming Iran from theocracy into military dictatorship. Can you elaborate more or give us the main idea that you elaborate in this book?
The Islamic Republic is theoretically a regime which is run by the Shia clergy, and the Shia clergy is protected against internal and external enemies by an institution called the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps is an ideological military organization. So in reality, there was a very clear division of labor between the two. The Shia clergy were running the state. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps was protecting the ruling elites of the Islamic Republic. But increasingly, we are seeing a tendency where the Revolutionary Guard is not just protecting the regime, it is in reality also ruling the Islamic Republic. And that, I think, is a novelty. And I think it really is changing the nature of the regime so that it no longer is a theocracy. It is no longer a clerical regime. It is in reality a military dictatorship, but it has a clerical face. Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei may appear to be on top of a pyramid, but in reality, he too is a hostage in the hands of the military organization.
They are using the Ayatollah as an umbrella or what?
Ayatollah Khamenei is the public face of the regime, and on paper, he's also the head of state. But in reality, it is the IRGC, and the Revolutionary Guard is using the legitimacy of the Shia clergy in order to advance its own interests.
What was the message sent by Zarif when he said that he's under pressure of the National Guard, or he wants to do diplomacy, and what is the message about it?
Well, first of all, I'm very sure that the interview was not leaked. It was in reality given to the press by Dr. Zarif himself. And I believe that his motive is very clear. He believes that he should run for president in the June presidential election. And he also believes that by running for president, he can have a say when and if Ayatollah Khamenei passes away. Everyone in Iran knows that the person who will replace Ayatollah Khamenei will be chosen by a small group of people. The Revolutionary Guard will have huge influence on who will be the successor after Mr. Khamenei, but the President of the Republic gets a seat at the table. Now, that influence may not be big, but then nevertheless, it is important. So Dr. Zarif truly wants to run for office. However, I think that he is mistaken in believing that he can mobilize the public opinion in Iran for his cause by complaining. After all, it is hardly any news that the Quds Force of the Revolutionary Guard has an impact on strategic decision-making in Iran. Everyone knows that. And Dr. Zarif, as someone who has been involved in Iranian diplomacy for the past 40 years, he knows this better than anyone.
Yeah, he's a part of the system. What do you think about what former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo and the Republican foreign policy leaders in the Congress, they are demanding a formal investigation into John Kerry? Following revelations, he informed Iranian leaders about covert Israeli military operations. How much is that true, that the Biden administration envoy Kerry said that this is not true? He didn't do that.
Well, right now it is difficult for us to make a serious assessment of the allegations. The only account that we have is information provided by Dr. Zarif, the Foreign Minister of the Islamic Republic of Iran. That is the only information available. We don't know if it is true that John Kerry actually provided him with information and insight into Israel's plans and designs. We also, for that matter, do not know if it was the policy of the United States at the time to prevent an Israeli attack against the Islamic Republic. So what Secretary Kerry might have done might have been completely legal and in line with U.S. foreign policy objectives, but for the time being, we only have one account.
I want to ask you about what happened lately. Iran-U.S. warship in first tense Mideast encounter in a year. Tehran did not immediately acknowledge the incident in the southern reaches of the Arab Gulf, which resulted in no injuries or damage. Is there any sign of new confrontation between the two countries?
The Persian Gulf is a place of confrontation between Iran, the neighboring countries, but also external superpowers trying to get influence in the area. So this is hardly new. But I do believe that the Islamic Republic is trying to convey the message to the United States that it is not weak, that it is capable of defending itself, and it is also capable of doing great harm in the Middle East region if U.S. sanctions are not removed. So what we are seeing is that in spite of the fact that the Biden administration may be interested in going back to the JCPOA nuclear deal, we see heightening of tensions between the two countries exactly because of the preparations for U.S. return for the JCPOA. The Islamic Republic believes that it cannot afford to look weak in the course of the negotiations, so we see these kind of incidents.
IRGC, the Iranian official, said after the Joint Commission meeting, he said, "We think we are on the right track, yet there are still challenges and difficult details," talking on JCPOA. So how do you think the negotiation will go on?
Well, I do believe that both countries are interested in returning to some degree of normalcy, but there are limits to what the United States can do and cannot do. And of course, there are also limits to what the Islamic Republic can accept. I do believe that the Islamic Republic is more or less resigned to the fact that US sanctions against American companies cannot be lifted. Even if the United States returns to the JCPOA, I do not believe that US business will go back to Iran. What I do believe is that the United States, at most, can secretly convey the message to Tehran that it may not enforce second-order sanctions, which means that other countries may engage in trade with the Islamic Republic without risking prosecution in the United States.
Let me go back to another book of yours. You are the author of Political Succession in the Islamic Republic of Iran, Demise of the Clergy and the Rise of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. Is there any particular information we should know by reading this book?
What I try to explain is the bigger mechanisms at play in the Iranian political system. I cannot, and I do not believe anyone can predict which person, which individual will succeed Ayatollah Khamenei as the next head of state in Iran. The bigger mechanism at play is that nowadays it is no longer a group of clerics, let's say the network of Mr. Rafsanjani, the former president of Iran who passed away a few years ago, because he was the person instrumental in making Mr. Khamenei the leader of Iran in 1989. Nowadays, that network is extremely weak. It is more or less taken over by Mr. Rouhani, President Rouhani, and the likes of Zarif and other technocratic types. This group is relatively weak. But at the same time, we have a very, very strong lobby group capable of pushing and shaping politics in Iran in such a way that they can actually choose the next leader. And whoever will be the next leader of the Islamic Republic, whoever replaces and succeeds Ayatollah Khamenei more or less will be indebted to the Revolutionary Guard. So we are going to see deepening of the same situation that we have right now, where the state has a clerical head of state, but for all practical purposes, the Islamic Republic will be a military dictatorship. The only difference between Iran and many other countries is that the Islamic Republic, and even before that, the Pahlavi regime, they had a much better and much more bureaucratized and much more skillful approach to the question of using foreign proxies, so that Iran managed to achieve its goals much better than many of its regional competitors. We have seen a degree of professionalism not seen when it comes to other Middle Eastern countries. So in that sense, I am not particularly surprised that the Islamic Republic is not willing to give up its support to foreign groups. And I am also not saying under any circumstance a situation where the Islamic Republic, in an agreement with the United States, simply declares that it is willing to severe help, for example, to Lebanese Hezbollah. This is not going to happen. This is one of the pillars of security of the Islamic Republic, and the other pillar being the missile program of the Islamic Republic.
If these two issues cannot be included in the negotiation, so what is the purpose of that? Of doing a negotiation only on the nuclear program?
Well, that is exactly it. I do not believe that the Biden administration can demand, and the Islamic Republic cannot afford to give in. So perhaps there is going to be a diplomatic dance where they pretend to agree, but in reality, some of the fundamental disagreements between the two countries will remain. Now, the next question, obviously, is if the United States believes that the Middle East has such a huge importance and priority in U.S. foreign policy, that the U.S. should invest more in the Middle East and get entangled more, including militarily or not. If the United States believes the next big threat to U.S. security and to the global balance of power comes from Asia, then the United States may not make Iran and Middle East such a big priority.
This is why there is a relation maybe between the military withdrawal from the Middle East and the new strategy of Biden administration.
Well, I'm not entirely sure that it is just the Biden administration interested in disentangling itself from the Middle East. I saw this tendency during the presidency of President Obama. Clearly, I saw it during the presidency of President Trump, where we, for example, saw increased U.S. arms sales to the Middle Eastern countries. But at the same time, when oil facilities in Saudi Arabia were targeted by the Islamic Republic, President Trump, and I'm quoting him, he said at a joint press conference with the Crown Prince of Bahrain, he said, "We were not attacked. Someone else was attacked." So clearly, we have three administrations trying to disentangle themselves militarily from the Middle East. The Obama administration, the Trump administration, and now the Biden administration. This is not a new trend. And I do believe that in part, this has to do with global balance of power and greater interest in the rise of China.
Understood. I'm going to end this interview by a last question on UAE. The UAE sent food aid to Sudan. A third plane from Emirates Red Crescent has large quantities of corona vaccines on board. It arrives to Damascus. How do you think, or how do you see the humanitarian role of the United Arab Emirates?
I think it's really interesting, and I think it's in some ways very good for the region that Saudi Arabia and United Arab Emirates reach out to some of the allies of the Islamic Republic. We have seen Muqtada al-Sadr suddenly showing up in Saudi Arabia. We are seeing greater UAE involvement in business life and investments in Iraq. And we are now seeing this signal sent to Syria. These are actually very positive. If Saudi Arabia and United Arab Emirates would like to compete with the Islamic Republic, these are some of the means they need to take into use in order to compete. So in other words, if the large Sunni and small Sunni countries just give up and say that this country is an ally of the Islamic Republic and that group is Shia, then you're going to have more sectarianism. But if these countries actually say that, no, we're going to have a constructive dialogue, then we will see a very, very different mechanism and dynamic in the Middle East region.
This is very important. Thank you so much, Ali Alfoneh, Senior Fellow at the Arab Gulf States Institute. Shukran. Thank you so much.
Shukran, Kabira.